A tower so tall it will pierce the clouds above Manila Bay, casting shadows across an entire city district. But 3 billionaires are locked in a battle that's tearing the Philippine government apart. And the winner will control the future of Southeast Asia's most strategic skyline. In 2019, architect Maria Santos stood on a Makati rooftop, sketching something that would either make her career or destroy it. She was designing what would become the Philippines' first true supertall skyscraper, a structure that would rise higher than anything her country had ever attempted. The problem? The Philippines has never built anything taller than 318 meters. Yet now, 3 rival projects promise structures exceeding 500 meters, each backed by different billionaires with competing visions for the nation's future. Here's what makes this terrifying. Manila sits directly on the West Valley Fault. The Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology released an assessment in 2023 warning that a 7.2 magnitude earthquake could strike at any moment. When Santos presented her initial designs to international engineering firms, the responses were brutal. Japanese engineers called it suicidal. American firms refused to bid on the project. But Filipino developers saw something else entirely: national pride wrapped in steel and glass. Then the Chinese made an offer that changed everything. If you're curious how money and ego collide in ways that reshape entire nations, hit subscribe because this story gets wild. Henry Sy Jr.'s SM Group fired the first shot in 2021. They announced Grand Central Park Tower, a 560-meter mixed-use giant that would be funded entirely by Filipino capital. This wasn't just another development project. Sy Jr. told his board something that would define the entire competition. "My father built this empire from a shoe store. We don't need foreign approval." The tower would house luxury residences, office space, and a hotel, all constructed with Philippine steel and concrete. It was a declaration of economic independence. 6 months later, Chinese developer Greenland Holdings proposed Pearl of the Orient. At 580 meters, it would be taller than Sy's tower, and it came with 12 billion pesos in Belt and Road Initiative loans. The terms seemed generous at first glance. Low interest rates, extended payment periods, technical expertise from engineers who'd built Shanghai's skyline. But buried in the contract was a requirement that would later explode into controversy. 60% of all construction materials had to be sourced from mainland China. The Malaysian consortium entered last with Luzon Pinnacle, a 550-meter tower backed by ASEAN funding. They positioned themselves as the neutral Asian partner, neither Chinese nor fully Western, offering what they called a regional solution for regional challenges. Their pitch emphasized shared cultural values and geographic proximity without the political baggage of Belt and Road money. But here's what none of them expected: the fishermen. Roberto Magno is 58 years old, a fourth-generation fisherman from Navotas. His family has worked Manila Bay since before the Americans arrived, before the Japanese occupation, before there was even a skyline to speak of. In late 2022, Magno discovered something that would stop all 3 tower projects in their tracks. The SM Tower site sat on reclaimed land that once belonged to 300 fishing families. Most developers assumed ancestral rights only protected indigenous tribes in mountain regions. They were wrong. The Supreme Court issued a clarification in 2022 that extended constitutional protections to coastal communities whose livelihoods depended on traditional fishing grounds. Magno started a Facebook page called Defend Manila Bay. Within 6 months, it had gained 2.3 million followers. Senate hearings were convened. Media coverage became relentless. The government split down the middle. Senator Risa Hontiveros called the tower projects economic colonialism disguised as progress. Senator Amy Marcos defended them as necessary modernization that will lift thousands out of poverty. Cabinet meetings turned into shouting matches. The president's office released 3 different statements in 2 weeks, each contradicting the previous one. Then satellite images revealed something that stopped construction on all 3 projects. Ground-penetrating radar showed a network of abandoned World War II tunnels beneath the proposed tower sites. Japanese forces built them in 1944 as part of Manila's defensive fortifications. The National Historical Commission released a report in March 2024 confirming that these tunnels created structural voids that would require an additional 8 billion pesos in foundation work. None of the developers had budgeted for this. Their financial models assumed standard Manila soil conditions, not a subterranean maze of 80-year-old military infrastructure. Greenland Holdings made the first move. They offered to absorb the entire cost if the Philippine government would grant them a 99-year land lease instead of the standard 50 years. The announcement triggered immediate public backlash because Filipinos remembered exactly what happened in Sri Lanka. Hambantota Port became a cautionary tale that played on loop across every Philippine news network. Sri Lanka borrowed Chinese money to build a port it couldn't afford, defaulted on the loans, and ended up leasing the facility to China for 99 years. The port became Chinese sovereign territory in everything but name. Filipino social media exploded with warnings. Don't let Manila become the next Hambantota. With all three projects stalled, a fourth player entered the game and nobody saw it coming. Juan de la Cruz isn't his real name. He's an anonymous Filipino tech billionaire who made his fortune in semiconductor manufacturing, supplying chips to American and European companies. In January 2025, he revealed that he'd been quietly buying land parcels around Bonifacio Global City for 3 years. His announcement came with blueprints for a 520-meter tower that would be 100% Filipino-funded. The engineering was brilliant. De la Cruz hired Japanese earthquake dampening specialists to design the structural system, but every component would be built by Philippine labor using materials sourced domestically. The tower would cost 45 billion pesos, an enormous sum by any standard. But here's where De la Cruz changed the game completely. He offered ordinary Filipinos the chance to invest a minimum of 5,000 pesos through blockchain-based ownership tokens. It wasn't a traditional stock offering or a real estate investment trust. It was something new, a digital ownership system that would turn the tower into what De la Cruz called the people's skyscraper. Every token holder would receive a proportional share of rental income from office and residential spaces. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 72 hours, 340,000 Filipino citizens had invested, raising 18 billion pesos before international investors could even react. The movement spread through overseas Filipino workers in Dubai, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Remittances started flowing back to the Philippines specifically to purchase tower tokens. It became a matter of national pride to participate. The structural design passed Shimizu Corporation's seismic testing in February 2025, rated to withstand 8.0 magnitude earthquakes. The certification gave the project engineering credibility that the earlier proposals had lacked. Construction permits were approved in March 2025. Groundbreaking is now scheduled for June 2025. But this tower represents something far bigger than architecture or engineering. It's become a symbol in the larger contest between Chinese investment influence and Philippine sovereignty. Every Filipino watching this project understands the subtext. If De la Cruz succeeds, it proves that the Philippines can build world-class infrastructure without compromising its independence. If he fails, it reinforces the narrative that developing nations must accept foreign control in exchange for development. The economic reality is more complicated than simple nationalism. The project will create 40,000 construction jobs over 5 years, desperately needed employment in a country where unemployment remains stubbornly high. But the University of the Philippines released an economic forecast in 2024, warning that the tower will also increase Manila Bay land values by an estimated 300%, pricing middle-class families out of neighborhoods they've lived in for generations. There's an environmental cost as well. The Environmental Management Bureau's assessment showed that the reclamation required for the tower's foundation will destroy 15 hectares of remaining mangrove forests. These mangroves are critical for typhoon protection, absorbing storm surge and reducing flooding in low-lying areas. Destroying them makes the entire bay more vulnerable to climate disasters that are only becoming more frequent. So Filipinos face a question with no easy answer. Build the tower and prove they can compete with Singapore and Kuala Lumpur on the international stage. Or protect the bay and the fishing communities that depend on it, accepting that this might mean watching other nations pull further ahead economically. The government hasn't made its final decision public, but sources inside the Department of Public Works and Highways suggest a compromise is being negotiated. Dela Cruz might be allowed to proceed, but with stricter environmental conditions and a requirement that 30% of residential units be reserved for moderate-income families at controlled prices. If you were Filipino, would you invest your savings in Dela Cruz's tower? Or would you join the fishermen trying to stop it? Drop your answer in the comments, because next week we're revealing which option the Philippine government just secretly chose. And if you want to see how this ends, subscribe now, because when this tower either rises or collapses, you'll want to say you followed the whole story from the beginning.